But you are on the air.
Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being recorded here at Think Twice Radio at the home of the future. Thank you, Richard Wick, our producer. And I am your host, Vicki Ross. I'm the executive director at the Western New York Peace Center, and very excited to have our special guest today, Cheney Brockington. Hi, Cheney.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, we're so grateful that you're on. So Cheney is a board member at the Western New York Peace Center, is a social worker, is a graduate of Open Buffalo's Emerging Leaders Program, right?
Yes,
and,
class of 2020.
And a mentor too, right? So still involved. Yeah, well, anyway, still involved there. Let's just say that. Very supportive there, as we certainly appreciate our dear friends and allies at Open Buffalo. So, and also we have with us Kareema Morris. Hi, Kareema.
Hi, Dr. Vicki.
Oh, Dr. Vicki, yes. So at Medaille College I am. They did give me an honorary doctorate. That's the only way I'd ever get one. So that's how I got one. But anyway,
you earned it.
Well, you earned everything. You deserve one yourself. So Kareema, you are a professor yourself, a doctor of psychology.
Wow.
No, of working for the community. So one of the things. Yes. So you work with children and youth, or I'd say youth more, all day long and then all night long too. So
yes.
And is also a board member at the Western New York Peace Center and the co-chair of our
Racial Justice
Task Force. Yes, thank you. It's just reminding me that the Resist Militarism just had a meeting tonight that I missed. But anyway, It is a busy, busy day every day. And I know you are two busy women, but one of the things I know you've been working very hard on that we've also been working on, that we're going to talk tonight about racial justice. So it's a very big topic. We'll just, get to the parts we get to about it. It is huge. It is long-standing, huge issue, and every bit as big today, I think, as it has been for a very, very long time. So I'm eager to listen and hear and learn from both of you about what we have to do and what we're going to do. So anyway, so Cheney, why don't you start us off a little bit with actually what you see as some of the biggest racial justice issues in the community right now?
Oh man, such a big question, right?
Right.
If we're talking specifically, I think about Buffalo, and I have to say, I am a transfer to Buffalo. Apparently, I don't get my badge until I'm here for 5 years, and I'm a little bit under that. So I am a Buffalo transfer, but I do think that does give an advantage, because coming to this city, I had an opportunity to really kind of look at things from a neutral perspective. And one of the things that I see specifically in terms of just Buffalo in general is that there is a large majority of racial injustice. And we talk about it from the criminal justice system. We still see the implementation and the effects of zero tolerance policy that was implemented in 2006 in this city. We have a very serious criminal justice problem. And I know that for everyone watching, we're getting ready to have an amazing special at 8:15 surrounding criminal justice. But criminal justice reform is so needed, specifically in New York, but also in Buffalo. We have a large majority of many populations, such as Hamlin Park and Central Park, which have really been ostracized. And there's been large disparities between women and men, because so many of our men have been funneled into the criminal justice system, starting at a very early age, right, from the school to prison pipeline. We have 40% of the population in Buffalo being African American, and a very large majority of that population, between 70 to 80%, being at or below the poverty threshold. We have 1 in 3 Black men in this area, specifically in this county, who are expected to have a criminal conviction before they reach the age of mortality, which we know for Black men is a lot younger than Black women, and then other women and men as well. I mean, we could just go on and on about the statistics, but I think that a large majority of that as well is just economic inequalities, right? When we talk about the economic inequalities between Main Street in Williamsville and Main Street in Buffalo, literally 2 miles in between each other, we see large racial inequalities, but we also see large economic inequalities. Buffalo Public Schools is another area where we just continue to see what out-of-school suspension rates look like, right, and what unaddressed out-of-school suspension rates create when it comes to our Black and brown youth. So many being funneled into the school-to-prison pipeline, so many not having the proper services to be able to learn and to continue to grow and continue to develop in a healthy and supportive environment. So when we talk about racial justice, and lastly, obviously, just criminalization of marijuana, we have issues with parking tickets, we have continued stop and frisk in our city. So when we're talking about these issues all funneled together, it really does create the perfect storm. It creates the perfect storm of continued racial injustice. It creates a perfect storm where a lot of issues become too big and kind of almost too big of an umbrella or too big of a mushroom to sometimes address and stop from one specific area. And so people feel as if they're kind of continuing in this cycle without one way to specifically go and to target so many of these areas. Racial injustice is all over our city. And we continue to see it in other cities as well, right? This is not just a Buffalo problem. This is a New York problem, Chicago, Minneapolis, South Central LA, all over the country. We see this specific problem, but it seems to be unaddressed by so many of our leaders who are supposed to be protecting and serving, and so many of the community members, it ends up falling on their shoulders, which is not the way that it's supposed to be.
Although I'd also say that we are one of the most racially segregated cities. I think we might be, in the top 6 or something, or maybe even higher. I'm not sure, I can't remember the number, and also it might have changed since the last time I heard it. But in general, we are definitely one of the most segregated. And I'll never forget hearing you speak when we did the racial justice. What did we call it? March for racial justice in education and what was it?
At the park.
At the park in Williamsville. At the park in Williamsville. And yeah. And actually what you said is, people say this is the city of good neighbors. I'm here to tell you, it's not the city of good neighbors.
It's not.
Here's the part is that, actually I think I didn't think this at the time, but I might say you might take issue of it might be the city of good neighbors, but not across the racial segregation lines. So that, it's like, here's the Black community, and here's the white community, and here's the immigrant community, and here's a little patch of immigrant community over here. Here's South Buffalo. It's a foreign country to me. I'm sorry to say, but, that's sort of the way it is.
Absolutely. And I do think that that's great. I do think that sometimes these specific slogans, right, that we throw out sometimes are so damaging, like Buffalo Love and the City of Good Neighbors, and even Bill's Mafia. We were talking about Bill's Mafia. I know I'm probably going to get a lot of upset about talking about Bill's Mafia. I'm not a Bills fan, so I get to, but, we were talking, I was just recently having a conversation about Bill's Mafia, right? This idea that a lot of people come together in this stadium and everybody's one big happy family for 17 weeks. Right? We don't care about race. We don't care about color. We're united front. We're all one big happy family. We're all singing the shout song and dancing. And then as soon as that season ends and February comes, usually it's December, no offense, but January comes. And then after that, it's just back to the old grind. Orchard Park stays in Orchard Park, Buffalo and East Side stays in the East Side, Williamsville stays in Williamsville, and we continue to see promulgated segregation. We had everybody singing the song for the playoff game, and then a couple of days later, we saw elected officials and other individuals that were coming down for the, the insurrection at Capitol Hill. So we have to look at that, and so we have to look at that intersectionality and really ask ourselves, what does that mafia actually consist of? What does that City of Good Neighbors consist of? Is it equally you know, is there equal distribution, not just within the 16 months that our team is playing?
So what do you think, Kareema?
Well, it's a lot of factors into it. Even based down to the early childhood programming. It's just so crazy because you see that in education. I have children in the district. I'll say that.
Right.
And you see the conversation being different at certain schools. You see the teachings being different at other schools and the way things are executed. So for those 16, what did she say, 16 weeks?
Right.
It's like Christmas. Everybody's one big happy family. And then that's on that side, that's on a Sunday or that's on a Monday night, whatever football schedules are. But, when it comes to the kids and they got to go into the classrooms and they have to have conversation with their quote unquote friends, things really change. The dynamics come out more so in how they're handled instead of dealt with. So to me, I think that, because my son went to a private school, so he feels as though when he became a district student, he said, why don't these teachers like me, but the other teachers at St. Mark do like me? So he feels like he's being tolerated as a student, and he's only 12 years old.
Wow.
So at first I had to really step back because it's my constituents and listen to the classroom. And it was degrading to know that these teachers talk to the kids like that. So they take our power early on. If you let them, he's it took away his power, his voice. So I think when we flutter up and we have those events, everything's cool. And then when we go to work and we go to school, it's very quiet, but it's happening on a daily basis. And then we all reconvene to those happy moments. So I just really think it's heavily present in our city from early childhood to adult. And it's not a secret.
One of the things I've thought, and I have come to learn just how deep racism goes, just how deep. Also misogyny and a lot of the isms, but I'm going to say racism and sexism both go so deep. And racism goes so very deep in ways that we can say that it's not there, and people might think. I mean, I said it on WBEN that I am racist. I have, and actually, other, people have said to me, Vicki, you're not racist. But I bet people would tell me, yes, Vicki, you are. I know it's in me. I know that it's in all of us. When we think, and I won't say maybe not 100% of people, but for all of us, there are so many after effects of all the many years, the history, the legacy of all of that, and then the very current situation of all of the racism. So all the reason why people talk about reparations, because it's been these so many years. It's been the criminalization of black people. It's been that the history of the police is that they were the slave catchers.
Slave patrol. Yeah.
Right. So that's a reality. We can't pretend that wasn't true. We can't pretend that there. We can't just say, oh well, never mind. We're the melting pot. We're not. First of all, we're the example. We're not the melting pot. It's not melted. It's a highly segregated city, right? And we just have a lot of honest conversations to be had before we can really make progress. Because we can't just, saying, I don't, pretend it doesn't exist isn't helping us. And in fact, it's hurting us. So some of the white supremacists in the white supremacists with the MAGA hats who will say, oh, well, we're not, it's not about, it's not white supremacy. It's a way of life. That's what they say. But when you have the way of life, then you have to adopt this whole doctrine, right? It really is a cult. And part of that cult doctrine is that the white people came, and we have the oh God, what did they call it? The expansion westward, and the manifest destiny is what I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
A manifest destiny, and that pioneer spirit, the settlers. Well, the settlers were the invaders. That's what it was, and it was about violence and genocide and enslavement, and that's what it was. It wasn't about, and that is white supremacy. They won't use that word, but So anyway, I mean, but even without all that, it is still, as we were just saying, it is so ingrained that it's in the air we breathe, and people who say and think they're not affected by it are just wrong. Now, let me ask you this. Would you say that Black people are affected by it?
I mean, as a whole, yes, they are. Even in the medical treatment and how Black women giving birth are treated.
Right.
I can think back to when I was a teen and I was a teen mother, and the things that they sent me home, and other people stayed. But, when they had the same situation and I was at home miscarrying, it's just so many different levels to it. And because, like in every profession, I know somebody or I know something that's attached to it, and you can see the clear difference or the clear division. In a melting pot, I really think the only melting pot I've ever experienced outside of other countries, like right outside of our door, is only Canada. Everyone, and I don't live there, but I know plenty of people, they're treated all as people, and it's more respectable and more comfortable to be Black in an environment or a setting like that. You can date who you want to date. You're not looked at a certain way, and it's just so much to it that, we don't even think of it on a whole perspective as to how we really are affected.
Right.
But, even from when you go downtown, I learned about Section 8 when I lived in the suburbs. I grew up on the east side of Buffalo. My mother owned our house. I didn't know about Section 8. I didn't know about these services until I started being in the suburban area and having suburban friends. And they taught me that side of, so it's like, okay, we're treated this way, but we're probably the hardest working, grinding, hustling people I know. And, we're just shunned on many different levels.
So one of the things that we said we're going to talk about is also what do we need to do about it. So one of the things, the problems are so big and they are so pervasive. So I couldn't remember when we were talking about that march in Williamsville, what it was even, because they said, well, we don't want to talk about the policing and the criminal justice because people have been talking about that, right? So we want to make it about other things, and it might have been economic. It might have been education and economic justice or something, But it just in every facet, as we said, in the medical. Tomorrow, our beloved Dr. West is going to be talking about disparities in the medical field at 4:00 at a UB. So people can find it on our calendar, WNYPC.org. But so just in we just said, education, healthcare, housing, in the environmental racism, right? That where's the nuclear waste? Where's the other waste? Where's the landfills? Where's the where are the dirty factories, that are polluting things? So anyway, so if we say, so this is the legacy, and this is the history, and this is the current situation. So I know that many of us, and you are two of them, who are working very hard to educate, and to change, in every venue, in every way, for our young people especially, and just for all of us. So we talked about so first of all, let me say, for allies, what does it mean to be a good ally for people who are not Black, for white people, or anyone who wants to be an ally for racial justice.
To not remain silent, to speak up when they see it going on, just the way they would for themselves. They're not at risk by speaking up, because if it had been them, they'd speak up and they'd scream loud. So I believe a good ally would use their voice just as well if it were their situation.
Lift every voice, right?
Every voice.
And loudly. Lift it loudly. You can sing if it's appropriate, but otherwise we're going to yell if we need to. Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
And to Kareema's point, I think that for me, something that really came out from 2020 was that we also need to be able to identify, like calling racism out is very important. But I think that as a country, unfortunately, we are still at a place where we still have to identify what racism is, right? Because I'm not sure if a lot of non-Black individuals truly understand what racism looks like. And every single time I hear certain individuals talk about racism, it seems farther and farther towards these extremist individuals, right? With white cloaks on and arrowhead sheets. Right. And that has to be the definition of racism over here. So anything else is a side. And the example that really hit home for me this year, every year there's something, but this year was the murder of George Floyd. And I'm not sure if you remember Blackout Tuesday, where every single person on Facebook and on social media, specifically on Instagram, was posting Black squares. And they did this apparently to symbolize Black Lives Matter, to symbolize the movement, to symbolize standing with Black lives. And people said, I may not ever understand, but I'm going to try to. Like, people had all these very motivational quotes about Black lives and allyship and what it means to be a white woman and a white man and not understand, but working to understand, and all these different things, right? And then we had the election. And then I saw that 56% of white men and 55% of white women voted for Trump.
Is that
so?
That's really the numbers?
Those are really the numbers. Absolutely. Those are really the numbers. And those are national numbers, right? In terms of New York State, the last time we had this election in 2016, Western New York was actually pretty high for Trump support. This year we did a little bit better. However, in terms of other counties, we didn't do great in terms of, seeing those differentials. And so I think that when I identify that and I have to go to my local Wegmans, right, or I have to then go to work the next day, or I have to go to these different spaces where I'm interacting with majority or a predominantly white group of people, it really does set in this idea that we're still at the point where we still can't identify what racism is. And I've heard people that have tried to defend, Trump supporters as not racist. And I'm using this just as an example to say that I think that we are also still at the point where we really have to be willing to do the work. I think allies really need to start taking time to really do the work and figure out exactly and be able to identify exactly what racism is before we try to then, reach one and teach one. Because if we're reaching one and we're teaching one and we're not giving the correct information, it can be just as harmful to the communities that we're trying to serve. So if we're still in a place where we feel as if, Trump support is not racist, or we're still in a place where we don't understand the segregation or the history of segregation in Buffalo, or we don't understand why, Orchard Park and Buffalo and 14215 look the way that they do, then maybe we still need to do a little bit of work. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Being able to identify that, to me, is allyship. Being able to say, I do need to do the work, or this is an area that I am biased, or this is an area where my white privilege comes in, is starting to do the work towards what allyship looks like. But performative allyship can be very, very damaging. And so I think that education, and as I said during the education and economic justice rally.
Right.
Like, relearning what white history is, right? It's not Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492 or 1692. It's Columbus literally murdered and pillaged and raped an entire village, right? It's that white people came into Black and brown countries and continents and literally just completely ravished every single resource, person, place, or thing that they possibly could. And so making sure that we're using that education and utilizing that education in a proper way to educate future generations and to educate ourselves is the foundation groundwork of allyship, in my opinion.
So would you say, and for both of you, this question of, I mean, I've come to think that, as I said, that just racism has gone so deep, and it is so deep that no matter how much we disavow it, there's going to be traces, there's going to be subtleties. We just took, I would just say this, we just took a training, and since you're both on the board, you might have, Kareema, I was just going to go, can you see that?
The phone was dying.
Right? Oh, okay. Okay, well then.
Yeah, so.
Oh, so if there's no other way of doing it. There you go. Oh, perfect. You did it. You did it. Are you able to leave it like that?
Yes, I
Good.
can.
Oh, good. Oh, good, if that's working. But I was just going to say that we just took a training, actually all the interns and staff, our huge staff of 50 hours a week, the 6 of us took this wonderful training. It was a group called Aorta, and I can't remember what that stands for, but anybody can Google it. And it's a collective that specializes in doing anti-racism training and on rooting out racism in movement organizations. That's their whole thing. So that to say, yes, at the Western New York Peace Center. So racial justice is one of the things that we work on. Right? And racial justice is something that we are struggling to truly understand, adopt, pursue, to be good allies, and to not be, a white organization. We have a history that started with Dr. King and Clergy and Laity Against the War, Clergy and Laity Concerned, as they called it. But also that included a lot of, as the years went on, white, educated, peace activists who were, not delving into the issues of marginalized people here. And so what happened actually to the Washington Peace Center, they ended up going out of business because they couldn't bridge that gap. So they said, they were confronted by the community that said, we're, in Washington, D.C., we've been marginalized. We're marginalized people who you're not helping us. You're not serving our interests. You're not paying attention to us. You're not an activist organization, right? Or you're not you're not a justice organization, right? Or a just organization. And so the people who were in charge left, a new group came over and they tried to make the switch. And finally, after, they'd been working at it for a while, they put, I read this email, it said, we've tried to make this switch and we haven't been able to, do it satisfactorily. And so anybody who wants to try, you're welcome. Just let us know within the next 2 weeks. Otherwise, our doors are closing. And that's what happened. So this is where I think this aorta is just a tremendous thing, very helpful. And it was a very hard-hitting training, very, very intense, very, very good. And it was an interracial group that went to it. And they did say, it's not just for white people. So it's also just about how do we address it. So was part of your other thing that you were sort of like saying, well, what do black people want to do about different things or not do, right? What does that need to be? What does that need to look like? So it's all about how are we moving ourselves forward together in different ways. So again, really for both of you, like what do you see as the things, the possibilities and the needs? And the needs to not do, and the things to not do or not feel hemmed in to do or called on to do, or always being, I mean, some of them are well known, like you don't ask, people to, like be the representative, be the token person giving your opinion or things like that, for example. Right?
As my friend would say best, they want us there as the token, but when we operate in excellence, they want us to take the back seat. So I think that more so our voices are being projected, and we're coming together more so as a unified front to resolve or dissolve some of the issues racially, even in the workplace, because racism is all around us. So I believe that if we realize that sometimes we're expected to dumb down and just be the token, to be yourself and project your voice in that setting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Allowing our voices to be heard and amplifying voices is so important. And I'm so grateful for spaces like this and other spaces where we've had the opportunity to amplify our voices. But I'm a huge proponent of Black love. And when I say that, I don't just mean in terms of relationships. I mean, just in general, and just working together, not just as a community to, move the movement forward, but to love each other. I think part of going back to this history is that so many times throughout our history, Black bodies have been pitted against each other and have been placed in spaces where they truly couldn't unify as a collective front. It's why oftentimes we see violence in our community. It's why we oftentimes see segregation within our community, right? These are all things that are a product of racism and bigotry and hatred and, chattel slavery in the African diaspora. And so they all relate back to our community. So making sure that we have those continued opportunities to show that love towards each other and to show that love towards our community and to amplify each other's voices and to support each other. It's really, really important. I have a lot of really great people in my life right now that I'm very grateful that I've met in Buffalo who are doing some amazing, amazing work. And I want to make sure that I'm continuing to not only amplify their voices, but just support, because I do think that support is so important. And I really think that building our community and still building those bridges that we've had built purposely and intentionally for so long is really going to be what I think the Black community needs and continues to deserve.
Well, it's such a lot that needs to be done, and people need the support to do it. I feel like the changes are so needed. The issues go so deep, but there's a certain amount of progress being made by this in this past year, for example. Not we're far from where we need to be, but the fact that the issues are still so gigantic and and go so deep. So actually, this is another thing out of the aorta training was they talked about it's like an iceberg. So there's the obvious part, yes, the hoods and all that. Yes, there's the actual if you want to call it full out racist or blatant, yes, people saying vile things. But the subtle things, those are so, actually when they called it microaggressions, it's not micro, there's nothing micro about it. Those things are assaults on people. And they come in the most, usually that's why I'm saying unconscious, sort of clueless kind of, which is no excuse, but it's just when we have to realize how much needs to change and how deep those changes need to go to be effective, right? So they use the example of the iceberg because they say, well, there's the obvious racism, but then there's all the other levels that go like way down. And so there's other behaviors that don't get commented on. Like you said, people will just they're easily turned away because they're not, they're oftentimes it's body language, it's different things that will be, less, certainly not, we're not talking about the actual attacks or overt racism, which also exists, but those subtle things that, and then there's the things like, which again, this happens with sexism as well as with racism, when, the example of a person says a thing and then somebody else in the meeting says the same thing and just maybe just little tweaking of the words, and people say, oh, what a great idea, to the second person who was a white man. Whereas the first person, the black woman or the black person who said it, and they just said it. So this is what they say, and I've been in a training. It was actually it was more in, misogyny. But it was, when that happens and you see that happening, say, excuse me, that's exactly what she just said that you just repeated. Because those are the things where they just sort of, it happens, and then there's like, in the fight, flight, freeze, it's the freeze. It's the freeze. People just like, for white or black people, we're just like, oh,
So, sometimes we don't acknowledge or even know that the microaggression was present. And it's crazy because I don't know, I'm like really keen, and I'm like, wait, what? And some people are like, well, I didn't see it like that. And I'm like, no, that was like aggression. So everybody doesn't know the cues, and they don't really understand, somebody's no to you was a yes to that other person. And it was a dynamic that played in there, but we have to start knowing the cues of a microaggression so we can address it.
Right. Well, that's what I'd say. That's one of the things I think a social worker is. Although it doesn't mean, I'm not trying to say that there aren't social workers doing racist microaggressions. Absolutely not.
Right.
But that antenna, that's what it's supposed to be up for, that kind of thing. Though that's what a social worker is attuned, or any traumatized person, let me say. So I say social workers because I'm talking largely about wounded healers, right? But that any traumatized person, so that's why, people, you have that emotional antenna going on because you need to for protection. And so then when that happens, so then that's when those are the people who know it. And then the people who either don't have that or don't want to know it. One just, I can't hear you, la, 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 la,
And so that's where that piece comes in about like knowing it.
Right.
Like knowing, you have to be able to know it to be someone who's there for doing the work. That you're right. That is so important. And sometimes that requires to be uncomfortable. Like we talk about these uncomfortable conversations, right? Like we've been having the comfortable conversations for far too long, but the second that it gets a little uncomfortable, people get very, very upset. Like sometimes I'll talk about the city of good neighbors and I'll immediately see people's faces like, oh no, like that's not my city. You're not attacking my city, right? But it's like, yeah, like where's the closest exit?
Right.
But if I'm talking about like, I'm sorry.
No, that's my other phone. Noise, sir.
But like if we're talking about racial segregation, it's like, oh yeah, that feels more comfortable, right? We're talking about the same exact things. It's just more direct and in your face. Being okay with that level of uncomfortability is so important because you're right, microaggressions are uncomfortable. Being that person in the meeting that says, excuse me, that's what she just said, is uncomfortable. Being the person that may be speaking up at your job and saying like, this was an incident of racism, for people who are going to most likely be extremely offended, because anytime you say that something is racist, people immediately clutch their pearls and get upset. So yes, like those are the difficult conversations that we have to have. And sometimes it does require actually using your physical presence to be there in a space. I always talk about the different situations where people, especially nowadays, Black community coming out and showing support for each other. If someone is getting arrested or someone's on the side of the road, I've seen a lot of people, even in the Buffalo community, stop by. I've done it, stop by and just like wait for a second on the side of the road and just like ask or give a thumbs up to make sure that that person is okay. Well, if I do that, I'm putting my life on the line, right? And we recognize that. And I know we're about to have a conversation about criminal justice, so I won't go too far into it. But that's actually an act of like putting your life on the line, because if someone doesn't like that or an officer doesn't like that, they can come up with any excuse to then come and harass me. That's the truth about our city. That is the truth about what it is that we see going on. That is the truth between the differentials that we see and how Black and brown bodies are treated universally with law enforcement versus how others. But if a white woman goes and does the same thing and she's standing right in front of an officer and is recording, she might get home okay. We saw people go home from, just tearing up the Capitol and going to the hotel to get a smoothie and a bacon, egg, and cheese. So she might be okay, but I may not get home as safe as she did, or get home with that same level of complete peace and like non-anxiety as she does. So we have to be mindful of the fact that doing the work sometimes actually requires to physically place yourself in your space, in that space, right? To be there and show up for others that do not look like you or that have been disenfranchised and oppressed. And that's uncomfortable work, and not everybody's willing to do it, but we do need that in order for the movement to continue to go forward in a positive direction.
And Vicki was saying that some of the areas, where do we notice it at? I was just thinking that the irony of over this pandemic, how we see hospitality become like totally reversed when it comes to a Black person, a Black family, or, and it's just like, guys, we've been doing this the whole time, but now it's becoming a major issue in making social media, because we're not being accepted on the hospitality side of showing up to have, whatever at a hotel, the same way that the other families might have a staycation, So that was another area that we see a lot of differentials in when it comes to race, is the hospitality portion, restaurants and hotels and things like that.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, one of the things that I hear that I'm hearing from both of you, and that I already think and I've already seen and we'll try and we'll keep trying harder to do, is that white people, is that people with privilege, is that people need to use the privilege for, and which is a tricky one too, because it's not about being the savior, and it's not about, but it is about doing things that you can do that other people, it's less dangerous. So I keep thinking of like Standing Rock, and I remember when this Indigenous friend, Nikki Thompson, friend of the show, who's all, and she's told this story. Have you ever heard her tell that story?
I haven't, but
yeah, you know her. So talking about how, all the elders got in the middle, and then the indigenous people were around them, protecting them. But then the white people went and made a circle around them to protect them, because the North Dakota police and whatever, were not going to treat them the same. They could do that. So that's the one thing. And the other thing is, be ready for the pain and accept it of seeing our own racism. I mean, that is something that I have had to do, and I struggle to continue to do, because if we're doing this work, we want to think we're not affected by it. We want to think that we're totally, immune, and it's far too deep. It's far too ingrained for that to be able to just say, it's all over. I really don't have any. No, we have it, because we breathe this same air, and it's still there. The realities are still there. The different situations are still there. And I want to say, actually, I've said this before, and it was a realization to me that I think one of the big blocks is guilt, because guilt says that if we have collectively done wrong, then isn't retribution what, is that the American way? It seems to be, when you look, especially at our criminal justice system, which we're, going to talk about. Then, so it's fear combined with guilt of like, that's what makes people, that only perpetuates the problem.
It really does.
So anyway, I feel like, there's a lot of hard work to be done. So one of them is being ready when somebody tells us, or when we have to see that we are affected still by our own racist stereotypes and everything else, our own fears and guilt and everything else, that we need to be ready to hear it and feel it. We need to be ready to learn and to accept it humbly and learning. So, I mean...
Not feeling attacked.
What?
Not feeling attacked when that conversation is taking place, because often people feel attacked when they're addressed. And no matter if I come the way I'm talking right now, or if I come with the hands clapping and the neck moving, it's still received as someone being attacked because they don't like the conversation.
Right. Well, I read that book, White Fragility, by the way, which was very good on a lot of it. And so that's one of the other big things, is just to be, so if this is our situation in the country, and it is, then, to see and, see and be receptive and interested and attentive to learn and to grow and to, feel the pain and just keep learning and growing. We learn more from our mistakes. We learn more. We only learn when we learn, when people tell us, or when we see ourselves, our own mistakes, or our own, missed opportunities or missed thoughts, whatever they may be.
No, absolutely. It's continued growth and continued learning, right? Like we were just talking about
Right.
your work as in your doctorate, and Kareema's continued work as a professor, right? It's, don't get to those places just overnight. It's continued learning. It's continuously doing the work. It's attending different seminars and doing teach-ins and attending sit-ins and being present and all these different things. And there are so many individuals that on a professional level and continue to grow in like maybe their curricula or in their academia. And when we look at that work, we praise people, right? We pat them on the back. But then when it comes to continued learning about racism, it's almost like, okay, I participated in Blackout Tuesday, or I went to one Black Lives Matter safe protest. And so now I've done the work, and now I know everything, and now I'm not racist anymore. And then when someone tells you, actually, there's a lot of work here because this has been indoctrinated into our schools, and maybe indoctrinated by a family member or a loved one that has some views that aren't appropriate or aren't safe for Black and brown bodies. Right. That's when we start to get that challenge of, well, no, actually, that's not what it is. And so, and we're telling you, yes, it is. So like education is okay. The same way that we see education as okay and standard across the board with everything else, and with academia and with curricula and with our professional development, is the same way that racism requires that lifelong learning too. And again, doing the work is hard, and yeah, it takes time, but it's something that we all have to do. I mean, I have to do it for other things. Like, I don't understand why someone else can't do it as well with me.
No,
know that. Oh, no. So that I believe a lot of this can be diminished if they really tell the truth in the histories. And as to how things really went, no matter how uncomfortable it is, because while we're guarding the feelings of the people who actually did it, we're the people who it happened to. So, just imagine, because when my son got older, he was like, we sat in those classrooms and we heard all those lies. So I can't wait to see how Black Lives Matter and all of these things play out 5 years later from now, when my grandchildren are in first and second grade, and they're trying to teach them the lie of what really happened in 2020. If they really just took the curriculum and told the truth about what happened for Black history and the things that we really did accomplish, and the major, inventions and things, like if they really bring that forth not 1 month, I think it would cause a ripple effect and a change of how we all handle the fact that Black people really are who they are and not like the curse to the community.
Well, I want to say, again, I think of so many things. I think of Dr. West and I think of Dr. King and so many teachings that really help us and give us the keys for these things. And one of them being unarmed truth and unconditional love. So the truth is, that racism has gone deep, that the assaults on Black and brown people over the years and the differential treatment and everything else, those are truths. So when we take those and accept them as true, and then learn, and then and then the unconditional love, because when you said Black love, it's love, it's love for everyone. So I also think of Cornel West says it as integrity and moral integrity and universal solidarity. So when we work to get there, and that means humbly seeing, not with guilt, but just with, you can only get where you get to step by step. So when you live in a racist society, a shame-based, racist, patriarchal, predatory, capitalist society that is rife with militarism and power over instead of power with, then we learn certain thought and stereotypes. So that's what we've learned, not because we're bad people, because that's in the air we breathe. So now we just face it and say, oh, okay, how do I learn to be different? How do I humbly hear what I need to hear or learn what I need to learn by my own self-examination or by my going to different things or learning or trying different things and meeting different people and, doing things a different way.
Absolutely. It's so important and so desperately needed.
So we are really close to the end of this hour because it just goes so fast when you have two really brilliant. And one of the other things, Black love means what? The Black people, if it wasn't for Black people, we'd have freaking He Who Shall Not Be Named. If it wasn't for Black people, the music, the art, the beauty, the and this is where, this is another thing he said about, even in, whether it's in sports or it's in music, is that all these white people who are loving on, their Black favorite athlete or their wonderful music and the different things that this is, these can be bridges too. When people sort of say, well, then why, take the whole, we have such a debt of gratitude and such a lot to learn.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you definitely see it in sports, right? And obviously, I'm not going to generalize, but specifically, we see that a lot in football and in basketball, and in so many other sports where we literally see Black men being hurdled into these stadiums and doing a large majority of the work, a very large majority of the work, whether the quarterback or whether they're not.
Right.
I mean, that's just the history of it. But, I always say Colin Kaepernick was one of the top rated draft picks in the NFL during his year, during the combine. Mm-hmm. He was also one of the most loved quarterbacks during his time before he was literally fired basically and was taken out of his role. He was one of the most loved quarterbacks in the NFL in 2015 until sorry.
I was just going to say he still is.
He still is to me.
More so.
He's always more be so my quarterback.
Oh, more so to me.
He'll absolutely always be my. Yes, absolutely. But as soon as he took a knee and stood for something, immediately it was, he's a monkey, he's this, he's that, by the same fans that appreciated him. The second that other players kneel, it's a problem. The second that LeBron said that, Black women are amazing, it was that he needs, or talked about police brutality and that people aren't listening, he was told to shut up and dribble. So it's kind of like it's this you love our rhythm but not our blues, right? You love when we're doing the work and shucking and jiving and doing the necessaries or just the things that we enjoy doing and excel at. Do you also love us when we have to speak up? which we shouldn't have to do in the first place. But do you love us when we have to speak up and continue to advocate for ourselves and for our communities? Can you love us in that same way as well? Because that really is that part of that unconditional love as well.
Right. You're not kidding. You're not kidding. So, final words from both of you. What do we need to remember or think about for now? For the
dear allies, please speak up. Dear Black people, still use your voice, and those microaggressions are real. Acknowledge them and address them.
Absolutely.
Agreed. Just to echo Kareema's point, I think that for allies, and again, I use that word so lightly because oftentimes I don't really love to use it, but I just continue to say that, the work is to amplify voices and to educate yourselves. Right now, the work for Black and Brown bodies, specifically for Black Lives in general, is to continue to take care of yourself, to continue to promote self-care, to continue to learn in your community and support your community to love on each other just a little bit more during these pressing and hectic times. These past 2 decades for Black lives, and I can say for myself personally, have been so unbelievably concerning. But I've also seen so much Black joy. So continuing to prioritize our mental health, our mental wellness, and our emotional and physical wellness as well is so important. And I just really, I appreciate this platform, but I just think that, racial justice right now is racial injustice until we have continued learning and continued movement from a larger community. And that larger community still needs to grow in Buffalo. So I just want to continue to promote that and to continue to encourage people to get behind Black activists and Black people in the community that are doing a lot of work. Shout out to Open Buffalo. The Emerging Leaders just launched the Community Restoration Project. So feel free to continue to learn about that and the work that's being done to work on restoring communities that so desperately deserve to be restored.
Well, I am honored and grateful for you both, for your wisdom and for your sharing and for all your wonderful work and wonderful selves. And so we've been talking peace together, and together we are talking peace in truth and love. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Thanks
very much.
Me.
Thank you so much.
We're so grateful. Now, do either of you want to stay on for the next?
I'm actually famished. I've been at work since 5 o'clock this morning. I was about to fall asleep.
Okay, no. We don't want to. Back to
I'm about
self-care,
to get
self-care,
yes.
and unconditional love, unarmed truth. People are exhausted. We love you. We're going to let you go. And
thank you so much.
Thank you both so very much.
Thank you.
We're so grateful to you. We're going to get there.
Thank you so much, Vicki. It was great. Thank you so much.
Too. Thank you so much too. Big
thanks, Kareema.
We'll see you.
See you soon.
We'll see you
soon.
Thank
you, Kareema.
Take care. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Much.
Thank
Big
you.
Hugs and love.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.